All right, Jack Daley,
How you doing,
bassist
Travis?
extraordinaire, producer extraordinaire, mixer, studio owner, worldwide global traveler. Um, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this, man. You are one of my favorite bass players, and I'm sure we'll talk about way more than just your bass playing. But I want to start by saying I know time is valuable, and I thank you for your time. And we're going to try and condense your life essentially as much of it as possible within the next hour or so. Um, I will post our interview. I will do an intro where I talk about all your credits, the Joss Stones, the Lenny Kravitz, the Spin Doctors. The list goes on. I mean, Beyonce, Natalie Imbruglia. I've got it all written down here. It's crazy. Um, but what I like to do, just so that my listeners get a better idea of like your mindset during the interview today, is I always ask my guests, if you wouldn't mind, as strange as it is, would you maybe do a brief introduction, a bullet point introduction, if you will, telling the world who Jack Daly is?
Well, primarily I'm a bassist. That's been my career. That's where I started. I actually started as a drummer, but that only lasted about a year, and then I switched to bass, and I never looked back. Kind of that's it's just the right instrument for me. And I grew up in upstate New York, where there's not much to do. Basically, it's cold a big chunk of the year, so I just turned to music, and I was never good at sports, so music was like my answer. And I did everything I could do up there. In other words, I kind of felt like I went as far as I could go in upstate New York, and then I knew I had to go somewhere, where there was more of a music business. So I ended up in New York City, which is only 150 miles away. So it was an easy move, and it was easy. I could go back and forth when I first got into New York. If I needed some work or whatever, I could jump upstate and do it. Um, so yeah, so I've just been a bass player, and also before I moved to New York, I worked at a studio for like 3 or 4 years, and that was because I was writing and singing and trying to sort of generate, a different sort of vibe for myself. I didn't want to be just a bassist, so I did that for about 4 years, and then I moved to New York, and I took that background, that studio background, with me, which ended up being like a huge part of my career. Because if I had just gone to New York and without that experience, I don't think it would have turned out the same way for me. I think that, even though I wasn't planning it that way, that experience, that studio, that 4 years of studio time really set me up, to be a studio musician, to know how to play the right stuff when I got into the studio. Because, most bass players, when they first hit the studio, they're way too busy. They're playing way too many notes, and it might feel cool, but it just doesn't make for a good record. So I learned all that before I moved to New York City, and when I moved there, within like 3 years, I started getting huge gigs, and you know it just took off from there. So
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we're going to backtrack just a little bit, just to paint a little bit more of a picture before we kind of get into some of the accolades that we will get into. Um, but talk to me a little bit about your upbringing. How did you first get into music? And a bit of a strange one, but what, if you can recall, was your earliest memory relating to, I find with a lot of musicians, at some point there's a mind shift change. And not
right.
with all of them, but at some point, if you decide you want to do this as a career, there comes a bit of a like a pull and push direction, and your mind has to kind of go, well, I need to do this as a career, and I'm going to try and do A, B, and C. Or some guys just fall into it, luckily, of course. But was there a memory that you maybe can remember where you started to feel that pivot?
Um, I used to watch with my mom, and probably my brothers, because well, my older brother. Um, we used to watch like In Concert, and the Midnight Special, and all these sort of shows that were just based on music. And I remember being like 12 or 13 and doing it, watching those shows with my mom and basically saying, that's what I'm going to do. Like I was very single minded about it, even, from a young age, 12 or 13. I just sort of knew, I didn't have a doubt that that was where I was going, So, um, and, you asked about that sort of moment that it kind of clicks in your mind. Like I told you, I was going to be a drummer, and I had like a practice pad set, which I don't think I found that inspiring. And then I was leaning up. My mom had this stereo with a big bass woofer, and I was leaning up against it in Chicago, 25 or 6-4,
Yeah,
that descending. Doo, 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 doo.
yeah.
And I just, that bait, like I just heard that bass line and I was just like, that's what I want to do. That it was as simple as that, and it just sort of from that point, it's been about bass for me, since that
That's
point.
amazing, man.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's talk about so you moved to New York City.
Yeah.
I know this is again possibly a bit of a strange one because things have changed so much. But when you get to New York City, how do you navigate through the waters? Are you trying to go out just to like open mics and jam sessions? How do you start meeting people so that you maybe get into different cliques that allow you to move
Right.
up different ranks?
Okay. So when I first moved to New York, I knew one guy. I knew a singer. This guy, his name was Gordon Dukes, and he had like a really good R&B band that played like every weekend. And it was sort of like it was a hang for like R&B musicians, guys that were doing like the hip hop tours or the rap tours or the R&B acts at the time, the Bobby Browns, those kind of. So a lot of those type of musicians were hanging there. And I went and auditioned. And when I auditioned for that band, the guitarist in the band is this guy, Ronnie Drayton, who was a badass, left-handed, just a really total badass. And he played in Defunct, and he played with Nona Hendrix and a bunch of other people. He's passed now, Ronnie, but he pulled me aside on that first audition that I did, and he said, "You got to move to New York," because I hadn't really officially moved yet. He said, "You will," and this is what he said to me. He said, "In New York, the cream always rises to the top." He said, "You will get so much work, you won't know what to do." So I said, okay. So, and I got that gig with that band, and I started playing in that band. And curiously enough, the keyboard player in that band had played with Lenny Kravitz. He was in Lenny Kravitz's band, you know. Um, Caleb James was his name, and he's in Japan now, anyway. But anyway, I got that gig, and I started hanging in those circles, and I started getting called for a lot of like hip hop tours and stuff like that. And I sort of realized a couple of auditions into that I was never going to get those tours. They weren't going to hire, you know, the white dude with long hair to play bass on a hip hop tour. And I got it. I was like, yeah, why are they going to hire me? And I would have great auditions, and I would be like, oh, I really nailed that. Then they'd be like, yeah, you're going to get a call back, and it wasn't going to happen. So I sort of realized that, and I sort of started moving into a little more of a rock direction, rock and pop, and which I think was just the right fit for me, and it was more, I could see it happening where the hip hop tours. I mean, I played with a few hip hop artists, but mostly studio. I did a bunch of records with Naughty by Nature,
Yeah, I
and
saw that.
I played in Moni Love's band for a while. You might know because you're British, or
Yeah,
you were living in England.
yeah,
Um, anyway, I ended up kind of, you know, turning my career into a little more of a rock direction.
yeah. But at least you were insightful enough to maybe look at things and change with the things that you saw happening. A lot of guys, as you probably have realized in life, some guys get so set in their ways, which is cool. It's good to have your focus on that one thing. But
Yeah,
some guys become so set in their ways that like they so like closed off to all these doors that are opening along the way. Well, so you briefly touched on auditions there, and I want to kind of like now fast forward, start getting to the Lenny thing. Um, and you might have answered it indirectly there anyway. But talk to me about how the audition for Lenny Kravitz comes about. I know you spend pretty much the next 15 years or so in his band. We're
Right.
going to talk about that. We'll talk about life on the road, etc., etc., etc. But I want to know a little bit more about how the audition came about. And then while we're on the theme, talk to me a little bit about auditions in general. Like, what would you advise musicians who are still going for auditions or getting auditions or get the opportunity to get calls for auditions, etc., etc., about mindset? You know, like, what can they do to remain confident in their abilities? What can they do to not get stressed out if it's their first audition with a star? That kind of thing.
Okay. You want? What do you want me to start with? You want me to start with the Lenny thing, or you want me to
Let's
start
start
with the
with
audition
yeah.
thing?
Let's start with the Lenny thing.
Okay. Okay. So the Lenny situation, I was hanging out with this guy George Lax, who is the keyboard player with Lenny. He's been the keyboard player with Lenny since early '93, like a few months before I auditioned, and we had been in a bunch of bands together. So he was away with Lenny for a while, and he was back in New York, and he said, "Let's go out and hang." So I'm out with him, and he's telling me that the bass player with Lenny has been acting weird, and he's worried that he's going to blow the whole tour for him. So I said to him, sort of, yeah, after a couple beers or whatever, I said to him, well, you know, if that gig comes up, I said, I'll learn the stuff in, one day. I said, I know all that music. I love Lenny's music. And I said, he says, I said, I'll nail the gig if. Anyway, I just thought I was just talking, right? So the next week, this was a Thursday night. The next Tuesday, the following Tuesday, I come home and my answer machine is loaded with like 10 messages. Lenny Kravitz is looking for a bass player. I recommended you. Lenny Kravitz is looking for a bass player. I recommend. So I'm like, this is before cell phones, 93. So I go and audition in New Jersey with Henry Hirsch, who's like Lenny's engineer / producer on the first 3 or 4 records. And it was about 20 guys from New York. And Henry said to me, I think you got the right, I think you're the right guy for this. But he said, I'm going to fly you and one other guy out to LA. So I said, okay. So we go out to LA. And the gentleman that I flew out with, he asked me on the flight, what key is this song in? Or how does this one go? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've I've learned this shit note for note. I'm ready for this audition. And that I'm gonna come back on that when we talk about auditioning. And we went out and auditioned, and it just, it just went. I knew I was gonna get the gig. I didn't have a single doubt in my mind. And it went that way. It was like, and in LA, they put it on the radio. So they auditioned about 220 people, I think it was, in LA, because they put it on the radio. And it was everyone from like Rudy Sarzo to Nathan East. Everyone that lives in LA that's a bass player that's working went and auditioned for the gig. Because at the time, Are You Gonna Go My Way was out and it was blowing up. It was huge. And, everyone wanted to play with Lenny. So, yeah. So I went out there and I auditioned and I got that gig. And started like the next week, and we had a couple of days of rehearsal, and I had to make good on what I said. I said I could learn the stuff in a day or two, and I had to. And but what I was going to say about auditioning is that the whole thing with auditioning is that a if you don't really want the gig, if it's a gig you're not interested in, I would recommend not auditioning, not bothering. But beyond that, if you want the gig and you think it's something you really want to do, it's all about preparation. If people tell you, learn these 10 songs, you better learn them 10 songs and you better know them inside and out so that if you get a curveball thrown at you or whatever, you can sort of deal, So, and with the Lenny thing, it was, first of all, I was into the music. Secondly, at the time, I was in a Zeppelin tribute band in New York.
Cool.
Every Monday night I used to do that. And he wanted like a John Paul Jonesy kind of dude that could also play funky.
Yeah.
So between my R&B background and the fact that I had done I was kind of like, exactly what he was sort of wanted, So,
Yeah. That's
but
amazing.
just to put a cap on that thing about preparation and not, I auditioned once for this band called Foghat. You know Foghat?
Yeah.
And I did an audition, and the audition went really good. I prepared really well for it, and it went really good. But they ended up wanting like a different kind of cat, like a guy that was more the lead singer. But then they called me to re-audition, and I sort of didn't prepare. I went in there sort of, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. And of course, I blew the audition because I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. I didn't prepare, and that was like a life lesson that I carried with me from that. Even though I didn't get that gig, I'm probably better off I didn't get the gig in the long run. But it showed me, like, don't go in half prepared. Make sure if you want to do something, you really prepare for it. So it
Yeah.
was a good life lesson.
It kind of blows my mind with the other guy asking you about keys and
Oh
ranges and
yeah,
stuff. You're just like,
yeah,
you're again, it's funny, musicians, they're like the most fascinating people on the planet to me, because it's like
yeah,
they dream of opportunities like this, and then the opportunity comes about, and he might have had the same mindset. He might have been like, yeah, this is my gig, and then like just not prepared, and like,
yeah,
dude, come on,
yeah, yeah. You got to
anyway.
prepare. Yeah,
um okay, so you land the gig, obviously. I want to know a little bit about life on the road for you. And what I mean specifically is, you know, spending long lengths of your life on the road and touring and in and out of suitcases and in hotel rooms and stuff. It opens up a world that many people fall victim to in terms of certain things that we don't have to get into. But what I'm interested in knowing is a couple things. What did you do once the glamour of everything kind of fades? I mean, you're in this
yeah.
band for a long time, and you still are in big bands doing big things. So I'm just using the Lenny thing as an example, of course.
Right.
But it'll kind of fill the scope. Once that excitement, that glamour, that romanticized period of, well, I'm on tour and I'm touring the world, fades, and the what happens with a lot of people is they get a little bored, or they get a little jaded, and they start to miss home, and they start to think of all the things that aren't cool about touring. Assuming that this has maybe happened to you, what do you do to keep yourself mentally healthy? Like, some guys I've spoken to seek out certain coffee shops. Some guys go and take walks in parks. Some guys read, like, whatever. Have you got any kind of, I don't want to call them rituals, but any kind of things that you need to do to feel gratitude and sane, especially while on the road for lengthy periods of time?
Yeah. Well, I think exercising helps. If you get up every day and you try to work out or do something physical, I think that's really a good thing to do. I think that if you have a home life that keeps you grounded, that really helps me. I'm married and have a great wife, and we speak every day when I'm on the road. I think it's a combination of things, and I think the other thing that really that's always been helpful to me is that I always have people in the band or in the organization that I spend a lot of time with. I mean, when I was with Lenny, I spent a lot of time with Craig. We sort of kept each other, sane, company. Uh, and with the spins that I'm traveling with now, I mean, we all keep each other company. So I think those things are really helpful and sort of give the illusion of almost like a home life, even on the road. And it was the same. I traveled for 4 years with Little Steven and the Disciples of Soul. In that band, we would go out every night as a band, as a unit, and have dinner together. And it did the same thing. So I think it's a combination. You have to do some private time stuff. Like you said, maybe it's reading, maybe it's shedding your instrument, maybe, like I said, exercising, maybe it's going out for a walk. And it's going to be different for every person, right? And you have to find the thing that works best for you. But you're right. I mean, it can get, you can go into a depression. You can get into bad habits. So you just have to sort of, try to hold that stuff off at bay and try to focus on the fact that, first of all, you're lucky to be out there and doing a gig like any of these gigs, right? And secondly, life is short. You just got to make the best of what you're, this is the career I chose. So I'm not going to be out there feeling sorry for myself all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I might complain once in a while, but who doesn't, but I
Yeah.
basically, I realized by not doing the touring thing for a while, because after I left Lenny, I took about, I guess it's about a 4-year period where I didn't do any gigs, none, not a single one. And I was just doing studio work, mixing, producing, and that's it. No live playing at all. And I woke up one day and I just sort of realized I need to incorporate this back into my life, because I just was like, if I don't get back on stage soon, I'm never going to get back on stage. And that felt unhealthy to me, for me, so
Yeah.
so I sort of started building it back up and started, taking gigs and playing around and, finally, ended up back, touring the world and stuff. So
Yeah. Amazing, man.
yeah.
Um, okay, and I'm gonna stick in that vein and allude to a post that I saw that you had put on Instagram,
Okay.
where you were traveling somewhere. I think it said in Germany. I could be hazy on the details, but the flight attendant had told you you couldn't
Oh
take
yeah.
the bass. It was too
Yeah.
big. You needed to check it in. And by the looks of the post, you had unbolted the neck and then managed to travel with it anyway. So something I often ask musicians is, let's take the sort of machine of touring away and say that you don't have like tour managers and roadies and all these people taking care of your gear. With little things like that, have you got any other sort of tips or little nuggets that you can share that have made touring with instruments, especially things like bass guitars or anything that could break, that airports, sorry, not airports, airlines don't seem to want to check in anymore? Uh, you got any other sort of smart tips that you could share in that regard?
I will say this, Spin Doctors, we do a lot of fly dates. And the thing that really helps for anyone that can do it is to stick with one airline, build up your points, be like one of the first people on the plane. And usually, not always, usually you can get the bass on. Um, and there's also like a form that I carry around with me. It's from the Musicians Union that basically they fought for the rights of musicians to be able to bring their instrument on if there's room. That's what it says. So basically, like if you get on early enough, they kind of should let you put the bass up there. And my bass is in a soft case. I can push it up in the back of the bin. It doesn't take up as much space as they like to pretend it does, but
Yeah.
but sometimes, with that in mind, I still have to gate check it at least.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm not carrying around my 66 jazz bass. I'm carrying around a newer custom shop that they're great,
Yeah.
but they're replaceable. They are replaceable.
Dude, I got so many friends in like touring bands who, when you see the pictures, you go, wow, look at these vintage guitars and stuff. And so many of those guitars are like replica made looking
Right.
guitars to look the
Right.
part because they don't want to
Yeah.
travel with their good gear
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Um, okay, here's a strange one for you. You land up staying in a band like the Lenny Kravitz band for as long as, like I say, on or off for 15 years or so. Talk to me about um again, longevity within a project and maybe some of the things that musicians can think about in regards to trying to keep relationships healthy so that they can actually stay in a project for a while. You see nowadays with so many musicians, and this is not a diss towards any of them, but they jump from band to band to band to band to band to band. And life of a sideman, I get that that is a huge part of it. But to be in a band as long as that, that's a real accomplishment. So, what are your secrets, man?
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that it's important to be able to stay with something if it's a good thing. I mean, obviously, I could have jumped around more, but I feel like it does mean something. There is a like a power to staying with something, you know. So my secrets are, well, first of all, pay attention, you know, listen to what the artist wants. Uh, Try not to be an asshole, because, you know, sometimes people will ask you something and, you know, it might rub you the wrong way, and you might be like, you know, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever. But you have to sort of suck it up, give yourself time to process it, and then try to deal with it in a way that's not emotionally charged, you know? So, you know, and when I first joined Lenny, like the first week, I was playing one of the songs, and he's such a good bass player that he picked up the bass. He was like, yeah, those are the right notes, but it's fingered differently, you know? And he showed me how he did it and stuff. And I sort of realized during that moment that, like, here's a guy that if I'm not doing something right, he can just pick up the bass and show me. And I don't want that to happen on the regular. I don't want every day for him to be like, give me the bass. It's like this, dumbass, you know? So I sort of, you know, I put all those things together in my mind, and, you know, you want to keep the gig, right? You don't want to get fired, and you don't want to be like, you know, going from that gig, you know, it was a good gig to hold on to for 15 years. And it was a healthy gig for me, because we were on a retainer, so we were always getting paid. But I also had a lot of time where I could do other records and sort of develop my session bass player thing, you know. And I was really into that. I love the idea of, like, he'd be working on his record, and I'd be back in New York City or in London playing on like 10 records during the course of time that he did the one. So,
Yeah.
you know, I really liked that. And other gigs, some other gigs came up, you know, when I was with Lenny, and you know, for one reason or another, I just was like, I'm gonna stay with this, you know.
That's cool.
And yeah,
Well, it's
I
so
saw him the
glad.
other day.
Oh, amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's fantastic, man. I mean,
yeah.
I've been a fan for years. I'm not entirely sure of the date. I'm pretty sure I saw you. You had to be with the band given the timeline. Um, he came to South Africa
Oh
once.
yeah, yeah.
You guys played, but it was a strange lineup. It was Goo
The
Goo Dolls,
Cult,
the
the
Colts,
Cult, and the Goo Goo Dolls.
and
Yeah,
you guys. Yeah, I was at
yeah.
that concert.
Yeah, yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
that
I
was
remember that.
freaking
I was
amazing.
like, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be cool. We're going to Africa, and we're gonna be playing for all these black people, and it's gonna be so funky. And it was like
White
all white
people
kids.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember those shows. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, that was a great show, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears for a second because you started talking
Okay.
about sessions. Now, again, I don't want to take up all the time talking about your credits. I will list them in the show notes when I
Yeah.
put this up. But man, you've got some credits, dude. So talk to me. I mean, obviously, some of the ones that I mentioned at the top of the show, Beyonce, Joss Stone, people like that, Natalie Imbruglia. I mean, she was huge
Yeah.
in England when I was there. Um, she's actually indirectly the reason why I picked up drums, but that's a whole nother story. I'll tell it one day. Um, Tell me how that work started coming up for you. I mean, again, obviously you get this reputation as Lenny's guy, but are you going to England to do those sessions? Are you doing those sessions remotely? Are you doing them at your own studio at that point? Or because I know your studio, Doug Deep Productions, I know that only
Yeah.
started like 2017 or so. So, like, did you have a smaller studio or were you working with guys and going to their studios? How did this all come about for you?
I've always kind of had a studio of some type, you know, nothing like this one that I have now, but it really started more like in New York with different producers. Also, like, because of Lenny, like, it was a very bass centric gig. You know, I think that the bass got a lot of attention, and we did a lot of TV performances, and it just started getting the calls. You know, there was a bunch of New York guys. There was a guy, Matt Serletic, who was with Lenny's label, and he moved to LA, and he started bringing me out there a lot. I had done a Daryl Hall record, and the producer, Mike Peden, who is Scottish, but he lived in London. He was the A&R for vice president of A&R for Warner Brothers for a bunch of years. He started bringing me to London to play on a bunch of stuff after I played on this Daryl Hall song for him. And that was just like one of those things, like, I played on the whole Daryl Hall record, and then he produced one track, and he said, "Can you play bass on this?" So I said, "Sure." So it ended up, funny enough, it ended up being me on the verses, or me on the choruses, and T-Bone Wolk on the it was like both of us together, which was
That's
interesting.
cool.
And so this guy, Mike Peden, he said to me, "I'm going to call you. I'm going to be producing this David Bowie record. I'm going to be calling you." And I just thought, yeah, sure, whatever. So Lenny had let the band go for a while because we weren't doing anything. And I was like, oh, shoot, man, I just lost my gig. The next morning at 7:00, my phone rings, and it's this guy, Mike Peden. And he says, I'm producing this band called Lighthouse Family.
Yeah.
And he said, I want you to come to the south of France in like a week. And we're going to be there for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And I get back into bed and I said, well, I don't have to worry about my job anymore. Got a new job. So, and funny enough, I ended up being their musical director for a bunch of tours too. So I spent some time with them.
That band was
But
huge.
huge. They're huge. I know. I just co-produced a single for Tunde, the lead singer,
Cool.
that did pretty good. So yeah, he's trying to work his way back up there. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it just started happening like that. It was just like organically, I didn't have like an agent or a manager or anything. I just started getting calls, and one thing leads to another. I did a lot of work with Josh Deutsch in New York, who's another A&R guy. I did a lot of work with this guy, Dave Bellocchio, who was involved with all the Naughty by Nature stuff. And we did like 20 different artists with Naughty by Nature because they were blowing up. So they were bringing me in to play bass on everything from Shabba Ranks to Queen Latifah to Michael Jackson. We did a version of Scream. So, it just kind of came from all these different directions. And,
so
you know how it works with that type of stuff. If you go in and you deliver and stuff comes out great, you get the call back, and it just, so it was just like that. And New York was bustling then too,
Oh yeah, I can believe that, man.
Yeah.
So Matt, you mentioned Matt. He was the guy. I mean, I didn't even have these written down, but I remember looking at your website. He was the guy that produced a lot of the Matchbox 20 and Rob Thomas stuff.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
saw you played on a lot of the Rob Thomas stuff.
Yeah.
I saw that you had played on M People. Dude, nobody in America knows M People. Like,
well,
I brought them up the other day with my wife because she's American. And I was like, man, I don't know why I had an M People song sticking, like pop up in my head. I was like, oh man. And I pulled it up and she's like, what is this? I'm like, this was M People. They were like huge,
Yeah.
So when I saw that on your website, I was like, no way.
Yeah. I think I was able to do that because of the Lighthouse thing, because I played on a couple of their huge hits. High. I don't know if you know that song, but anyway, I got recommended to play with M People, and I did a couple of tracks with them in England and maybe a couple tracks in New York as well. I think they came to New York and they called me to do some stuff. So
that's
yeah.
Okay, we're going to switch gears and let's talk a little bit more about your engineering, production, studio life kind of stuff.
Okay.
I alluded to the fact that you set up your studio, Dug Deep Productions. That was in 2017. Beautiful. From the pictures I saw online, beautiful, man. Absolutely beautiful. Talk to me about your overall approach as a producer. And again, let's talk a little bit about mindset and if it differs from when you're in the production role versus when you're in the musician playing role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think what probably differs more than anything else is that in the studio, I'm the opposite of the way I would be for like an audition or like a live gig. In other words, if I'm doing a live gig, I like to be completely prepared, know all my shit, But in the studio, I like to be completely unprepared. I like to be, flying by the seat of my pants. In other words, I don't like to go and like study the shit and figure out all the bass lines going to be and everything's going to be, and then I'd rather just have a chord chart in front of me, maybe listen to the song one time and just play, So it's a different approach. I like the spontaneity of the recording thing, to be a little bit, because I find a lot of times if I'm playing something without thinking about it that much and just sort of feeling my way and adapting to what I hear going on around me, I might play something that is better than anything I can prepare and work out. I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm, different than other people with that, but I sort of like that approach in the studio. And I love what happens when you put 4 or 5 musicians together and nothing exists. And then 3 minutes later, there's like this magic piece of art, I just, that to me is like the most rewarding part about the recording process, so it's not laborious, it's just like magic, and a lot of records that I really love that I played on are like that. Even, believe it or not, even like the Lighthouse Family stuff, we used the drum machine, but we had like a keyboard player playing live, a guitar player playing live, and a bass player playing live. So it was like a live track where we were like all responding to each other and adapting to what the other musicians were playing.
Yeah.
I think that's what made that stuff sort of different, at the time. Anyway, that's my sort of thing in the studio. I love live. I love like a live rhythm section, and
Yeah.
just there's a magic to musicians responding to each other, and you don't even know you're doing it. Your brain is like doing these little micro adjustments or micro timing things, and it's hard to explain, but
Organic.
it's
There's an
yeah,
organic.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
have to agree. What are some points that bands headed into studio, especially if they're coming into a big studio for the first time? What are some things that they could possibly work on or prepare to make their time in studio a little bit more productive?
Right.
So I mean, again, maybe that's a little you know, uh contradictory to what you just said, because I'm taking away that organic factor. But I'm not saying they've got to come in like, we're going to have this for 6 bars and this tempo change for by 2 BPM over here. I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning like some guys go to studio, especially like, okay, the studio world has changed a lot, right? Like a lot of
Right.
people don't go to studios anymore. But the ones that have never had the opportunity to go to a studio like yours, and then
Right.
they paying either per day or per hour, what's the thing that they can do to get the most out of that experience is basically what I'm trying to ask.
I think, and you have to also take in consideration that what I was saying about preparation for the studio falls in behind someone with years and years of experience in a studio. So have to separate those two things. But what I would say for inexperienced studio musicians is tape yourself. Just tape yourself as much as you can. And in all honesty, the hot seat is the drummer. It's always the hot seat, because if the drummer's not good, if the drums aren't happening, you're dead in the water. You really can't, you can't get anything else good after that. You have to have a good drum track. So that's the real hot seat. But I would say, the most important thing is tape yourself. Listen to how you sound, and realize that the tape doesn't lie. I mean, it might not be a great recording, but you can hear if the shit's grooving. You can hear if the drummer's speeding up or slowing down. You can hear all that stuff. You can hear if the bass part or the drum part's too busy. So that would be my suggestion. Just tape yourself as much as you can. If you're a band and you're rehearsing and you're getting ready to go in the studio, just be brutally honest with yourself and be like, we got to simplify, or this segue going into here, this is not working. We got to and analyze what you're doing and break it down, and I think you'll have a better time when you get in the studio. Because I think sometimes people are shocked when they hear themselves in the studio for the first time. They're like, "Oh shit," and they look at me like, "You didn't turn the right knob." I'm like, "I got no
Yeah,
knob
it's
for
your
that."
fault.
Yeah,
That's fine.
or they hear it clearly enough that they can go, "Oh, I know what I got to do." So and everyone's different, but sometimes it's funny, the reaction.
You didn't turn the right knob. That's
Yeah.
hilarious. Um,
Yeah.
okay. At this point in your career, What do you feel has been the hardest part about being a career musician?
Um, I sort of thought to myself, like when I was leaving Lenny's band, I sort of felt like I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna be a producer, I'm gonna just produce and just do this. And then I sort of realized that at the time that I made that decision is around the same time that everyone was getting their own Pro Tools rig, and basically everyone at that point thought they were a producer. Everyone thinks that they have a Pro Tools rig they can produce. And I just was like, okay, well, maybe I don't want to just be a producer. Maybe I need to. So I think the important thing, I don't want to say anything's hard because I've been fortunate. I've been lucky enough to keep working. And, sometimes knock wood, I'm just like, how the hell am I so busy? But you have to keep reinventing yourself. You have to keep, it's like when I said I was going on all these R&B hip hop auditions and I realized, the white guy's not going to get that gig. It's the same thing. You have to always be honest with yourself and sort of analyze where you're going and if it's the right track or if you need to take a turn right, left, and you sort of have to see that. You have to see down the tracks a little bit and be like, okay, this is, and some things happen out of the clear blue sky. Like I got a call one day from Aaron Comas saying, I need you to fill in on a couple of Spin Doctors gigs. And I was like, all right. And I said, as long as it's a couple gigs, I'll learn the songs. And he's like, okay, cool. Calls me like 2 days later. He's like, I'm going to need you to do the whole rest of the year. And, 4 years later, I'm still spinning.
Yeah. Yeah, well, great
You
band. I mean, like,
Oh,
dude,
fantastic.
just fantastic band. Even, not to discredit certain bands from that era, but you see certain live clips from certain bands from that
Right.
particular era, and you go,
Right.
ooh. But
Yeah.
dude, I've never seen a bad Spin Doctors clip.
No,
It's
the
like
Spin Doctors
just
are
that
great.
band jams, dude. You know?
Yeah. 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 It's kind of a jam band. And I think that people don't really totally always get that because they had these big pop hits.
Yeah.
So basically they were a jam band. They came right out of that same scene, as Blues Traveler and Government Mule and all these bands that were jam bands. And they came out of that scene, but they had the big hits. So everyone all of a sudden was like, oh, they're just a pop band, but
Yeah.
they're not, and they're all, everyone in the band, they're all badasses,
Yeah.
Aaron's amazing. And I do
Aaron's amazing.
Aaron does a lot of work at my studio. He's one of the main session drummers that comes in. He's in here all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. It's been I didn't see that coming. That was totally out of the left.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah.
And to have a signature drum fill like the one going into Two Princes, I mean, there's
Yeah.
only a handful of guys who can claim they've had signature
Yeah.
fills, and
Yeah.
that's definitely one
Yeah.
of them.
And he was like 21 when he played that. Yeah, he's just a kid.
Yeah. Some guys, man. Some
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
um, Here is the dumbest question I'll ask you, but I'm including it into all my interviews lately just because it's a lot of fun. Um, you would have heard this question at some point because every musician has. You're stranded on a desert island and you're
Right.
only allowed to listen. Well, usually they say you're only allowed to listen to one album. I can't do that. That's complete torture. I'm going to say you can listen to one artist. Who is that artist for you?
Um, hmm. I'd probably bring it back to one album because uh I think the album that I could listen to on a desert island over and over and over again and never get bored with is probably What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Just because the bass playing, James Jamerson on that record is just so insanely fantastic. You know, I love Prince. I could have said Prince, and I love Prince, but sometimes the 80s thing, is just hard. I don't know if I'd want to listen to it over and over again on an island. But I love Prince. He's one of the most brilliant musicians of all time.
Oh yeah.
But I think What's Going On, really, and it's still relevant, as far as the lyrics and the message. It's still, I mean, what's going on is probably more relevant right at the moment than it's ever been. And the bass playing is just beyond brilliant. James Jamerson just, you know, he's it for me. I can't, there's no one better ever, I don't think.
That's
So,
amazing, man.
yeah.
All right, Jack, I've got one last question for you, man. What do you think has either been the best piece of advice you've ever received in relation to your music career? Or if you can't think of one particular piece of advice, what is advice that you could share that you've learned during your journey that might become good advice for somebody else?
Okay. So I think this is both, right? When I first moved to New York, one of the guys I met kind of early on, and he was a real hero to me because his name is Carmine Rojas. He played bass for a bunch of years with Rod Stewart, and he also played bass for a bunch of years with David Bowie. And the David Bowie period was like, Let's Dance and China Girl, and those songs were huge to me. And his bass playing was a big influence. So when I moved to New York, my friend Ronnie Drayton, who I told you about in my first audition, he introduced me to Carmine. And he told Carmine, this guy's, he's going to be a guy that, you're going to be seeing around. So anyway, Carmine had recommended me for this band, and it wasn't really my cup of tea. I didn't really like the singer. I didn't think she was great, and I was in a bunch of other bands that I preferred, I guess is what I should say. So I auditioned for them. I got the gig, but I was struggling with taking the gig. So I talked to Carmine, and Carmine said, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Do you think if you do that gig, you can shine?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, my advice to you is then take the gig." And I think that was a really good piece of advice, because basically what he was saying is that at this point in your career in New York, and it could be anywhere, it could be LA, it could be London, right? It could be Nashville. You got to get out and be seen. So if you think you can shine on a gig, take the gig, show up and take the gig. And that ended up being my approach in New York. At the point that I got the gig with Lenny, I was in 13 bands, and so I was being seen because I was all over New York. You couldn't go into a club, whether it be an R&B club, a blues club, a rock club. I was in all of them, and I was playing 7 nights a week. And a lot of that was based on that advice from Carmine. And I would give the same advice to anybody coming up, get out there and play. The thing is, you don't even realize it, but when you're playing in 13 bands, you're getting better. You're getting better because you're getting so much input, so much experience, so much also so much learning how to deal with people. You take 13 bands and say there's 3 people in each band on the average, you're dealing with like 100 and something musicians, at any one time, so you learn how to handle yourself, and I think that was just great advice. And Carmine, to this day, is still one of my favorite bass players, and he's out there working. He was with Joe Bonamassa for a long time, and he does a lot of the Bowie stuff. There's a lot of Bowie like tribute things that are all like top guys or ex-Bowie musicians, like Gail and Dorsey, or Carmine, so he's out there doing tons of stuff. And his advice, you don't play with David Bowie and Rod Stewart if you're a chump.
Dude,
Yeah.
is true. All right, man. Well, Jack, dude, that was incredible. Thank you for your time. I wish you nothing but success for all your future endeavors, and just keep on rocking, man.
I'm gonna try. Great.
Peace.
All right, peace, brother.